You know, some voices fade with time, but others, somehow, they just seem to get louder. Today, we're diving into the life and legacy of James Baldwin, a writer from America's past whose words feel like they were written for our present, with a clarity that can be startling and, yeah, often pretty uncomfortable.
Okay, let's just start with this quote from the man himself, because it absolutely nails the heart of his entire life's work. It's all about that constant push and pull, right? The battle between the identity that society shoves on you and the one you have to claw and fight to claim for yourself. That tension, it defined him.
Now, take a look at this timeline, because this is where it gets really interesting. You see that gap? Baldwin passes away in 1987. Then, decades later, boom, his influence just explodes. With the birth of the Black Lives Matter movement and that Oscar-nominated film, I Am Not Your Negro, suddenly everybody is reading and quoting Baldwin again. So that's our big question. Why now? Why does his voice from so long ago echo so loudly today?
All right, so to even begin to answer that, we've got to first look at this modern-day Baldwin revival, because it's not just that people are picking up his old books for a history lesson. Nope, something much deeper is happening here. From social media posts quoting his essays to activists on the streets using his fiery style, Baldwin's work has become something of a playbook for the 21st century fight for racial justice. It's like he didn't just describe the problems of his day, he handed down a whole moral and intellectual framework, a language, to confront them. And it turns out that language is absolutely timeless. So to really get where that power comes from, we have to go back, way back, to the beginning. We need to understand the world that created James Baldwin, the pressures that forged him into this unflinching witness of American life.
Growing up in Harlem, for him was like living in a pressure cooker. He was the oldest of 9 kids, dealing with poverty and a stepfather who was both a preacher in the pulpit and a tyrant at home. The church was supposed to be his shield from the streets, but his real sanctuary, that was the library. Books and movies were his ticket to a world way beyond his block.
And then, get this, in a wild turn of events, at just 14 years old, he actually follows his stepfather's path and becomes a preacher. For 3 years, he was up there in the pulpit, learning the rhythm and the power of the black church. But that experience, it ended up shattering his faith. He just couldn't square a religion that preached love with the racial hate he saw Christians practicing all around him. And that crisis of faith leads him to this massive turning point, the decision to leave America altogether. And this wasn't just a vacation. This was a journey that would finally give him the distance he needed to see his home country for what it really was.
So at 24 years old, with $40 in his pocket, he buys a one-way ticket to Paris. He felt that to be a black man in America was to live in a constant state of rage. And he knew, deep down, that that rage would kill him as an artist. This wasn't about escaping who he was. It was about finding a place where he could finally figure out who he was.
And this quote, man, it just says it all. Getting away gave him the perspective to see everything clearly. In Europe, he wasn't just another black man. He was an American. He was a writer. And that space allowed him to stop fighting the labels and start dealing with the real, complex truths of his identity. And from that new vantage point, he diagnosed this core problem in the American soul. He called it American innocence. Now, he didn't mean naive. He meant a willful blindness, an active choice to ignore the ugly parts of your own history and pretend they have no impact on the present. For him, it was a country that simply refused to grow up.
So this time in Europe was just completely transformative. He was finally free from the day-to-day grind of American racism, and he could embrace every part of himself, his blackness, his sexuality, his calling as an artist. And wouldn't you know it, that's when the creative floodgates opened, and he produced some of his most important early work, like Go Tell It on the Mountain.
Okay, so armed with this powerful new clarity, Baldwin eventually returns to the United States. But he's not just a novelist anymore. He comes back as this essential, challenging, and, let's be honest, confrontational voice in the civil rights movement.
And he didn't just accept this role, he owned it. He believed the artist's real job was to be a troublemaker, to hold up a mirror and force society to stare at all the ugly stuff it would rather ignore. And he did it everywhere. In his essays, on TV, and debates, he never, ever backed down.
So as you can imagine, the establishment saw this truth-telling as a major threat. But just how much of a threat? Well, this number on the screen, it tells a pretty chilling story.
1,884. That's the number of pages in his FBI file. Under J. Edgar Hoover, the Bureau watched his every move. Look at the comparison here. His file was almost 7 times bigger than fellow writer Richard Wright's. It's not even in the same league.
And this chilling little note from inside that file tells you exactly why they were so afraid of him. It wasn't just his brilliant critiques of racism. It was the combination of his race, his queerness, and his absolute refusal to be silent. He was a threat on every level because he refused to fit into any of their neat, controllable boxes.
So let's bring it all together. How did this life of witnessing, of truth-telling, of disturbing the peace build a legacy that feels more alive today than ever before? Well, just look at how cleanly his diagnosis from decades ago maps onto today's headlines. That American innocence he wrote about, that's the fuel for today's fiery debates over what history we teach in schools. His idea that race is a political invention, that's a foundational idea of the Black Lives Matter movement. It's like he drew a map of the fault lines we're still fighting over today.
And what's really poignant is that right before he died, he was working on this book, Remember This House. It was going to be about the lives and murders of his 3 friends, Medgar Evers, Malcolm X, and Martin Luther King Jr. His plan was to use their stories to, in his words, instruct the nation. He never got to finish it, and you could argue that for the nation, that lesson is still very much unfinished too.
So, if you want to know why he resonates, here it is. He gave us the tools, the very language, to understand a fundamental truth. History isn't something that's over and done with. The past isn't past. It is right here in the room with us right now. And he gave us a way to talk about it with honesty and moral clarity.
Which really just leaves us with one final thought to chew on. If Baldwin's job was to be a disturber of the peace, to challenge a nation's cozy lies, then whose job is it now? Who are the people disturbing the peace that we ought to be listening to today?